The agricultural data, it all agrees that in the 35th century BC, all of a sudden urban planning just exploded. Knowledge of the cereals, agriculture just exploded. Irrigation, canal works, farming, maritime shipbuilding, everything just exploded in the 35th century BC. Within 100 years, the human population exploded. It is an inexplicable mystery that has been mentioned in books for the past century. A new race of people appeared in the world. They were bearded, they were tall, they were very, very, very pale with deep lapis lazuli eyes. Introduce Enki, Lord of the Deep. The deep was to the ancients the underworld. Enki appeared precisely 432,000 shars before the Great Flood. This is where a lot of the confusion. Zechariah Sitchin claimed that was 432,000 years, and he based this off a mistake that has been corrected over and over and over. The mistake was reiterated by a Greek historian of Babylon named Berosus, who misidentified the ancient Saros system and said it was 3,000. A shar was 3,600 years. Berosus was wrong. He has since been corrected by many academics and scholars. Unfortunately, Zechariah Sitchin did not refer to any of them and went with the mistake so he could promote a history of the Anunnaki that went back almost 500,000 years, but it's not true. Dutch Orland manuscript says that years were not counted before the flood. In Genesis, it says only days were counted before the flood. The shar count system was a day count system, no different than the other calendar that started at the exact same time in history, which was the Mayan long count calendar. Mayan calendar is a day count system, 1,872,000 days divided by 13 epochs that are 400 years each of 360 days, meaning each one of these 13 Bactans is 144,000 days to make the whole calendar. It's no different than the original Hindu Vedic calendars. The yugas were all days, day counts. Every yuga is multiplied by 216,000 because the next yuga is 432,000, then 864,000. Every bit of it is the same thing, a day count system. They can all be shown in Chronicon where each yuga started and began when you use the day count system. So the Anuna appeared, built this fantastic civilization on the surface because they already had the technology in the underworld. They brought it to the surface, unleashed all their stuff. It's almost the same thing we find in 1902, but at a much reduced level. Remember my videos on 1902? I got like 6 of them now. So many things appeared for the very first time in history in 1902, like air conditioning. I got a whole list of all the companies, corporations, agencies, inventions, new books, and older books, but new translations that all suddenly appeared in 1902. So imagine, and that was a Phoenix year, but it was a very minor one. Imagine a major epic systemic cataclysm when everything on the surface is lost. Then the people in the underworld bring it back to the surface. 35th century BC, it answers all the mysteries of anthropology and archaeology. And now all this is going on. Humans are thriving right after a cataclysm. They're thriving in the pre-flood period. This is what's going on. But they knew of another cataclysm on the way. Well, they left more primitive humans to themselves. Now, the Babylonians, because this is 1,000 years after the Sumerian period, the Babylonians rewrote these to make it look like the Anunnaki as gods just went to the heavens. But the truth of the matter is they went back down to the deep. When this race of technological sophistication abandoned the very people that they were living among and training, when they abandoned them, they gave them the impression that they were leaving and going somewhere in the sky, but it was all misdirection. It's the same misdirection the Anuna did in ancient times to us today. It's the same. This is why the media promotes ancient aliens. The ancient aliens theorists take these things as facts and believe that we have this civilization in space. We're already building things on Mars. This is why Elon Musk is promoted too. It is the whole Mars mythology. It's none of it's true. Every single time these systemic resets are about to happen, the elite go deep underground and they let whoever survives survive on the surface, because they know when they come back up, they'll have their weapons, their armors, their technology. Guys, the more we study vapor canopy, the more we find out we've had multiple vapor canopies in the historical period. The pre-flood world, at one time, when I initiated my research, I was really thinking that the entire pre-flood world was a vapor canopy, and now I'm finding out it's not. It's not. There were two, maybe three vapor canopies at that time. Just like in 1902 at Martinique, when Mount Pelée exploded, incinerating about 40,000 people with one human survivor, Auguste, who was sentenced to die. That same story unfolded in 1902 in the month of May, a Phoenix year, in the month that Phoenix always appears. This is when this story took place. And two scientists, very rapidly, within a 4 or 5 month period of studying Mount Pelée after it erupted, just being exposed to the ambient radiation on the island, those two scientists, a 58-year-old and a 62 or 63-year-old, both men grew 2 inches. So you can imagine, if a vapor canopy appeared at 3895 BC, then collapsed within 200 or 300 years, then humans being born 20, 30, 40 years after that would look back on their predecessors as titans and giants. The same thing unfolded again after the Gihon flood in 3439 BC. This is when the Anuna appeared with Enki. They did not come from space. The Book of Enoch says the Watchers descended a mountain. So, we have the same scenario with when the flood was over with. When the great flood was over with, we have, according to the ancient Greek models, we had titans, giants, and normal humans all living in the same generation. And that's exactly what you would expect from normal humans that were exposed to vapor canopy conditions, to ambient radiation from a lot of volcanism. This is what Phoenix does. Phoenix always causes volcanism a lot. And it causes giantism in insects, animals, flora, fauna, and all that. The ambient radiation releases HGH, human growth hormone, at exponential levels. Humans are growing, developing epithelial cartilage, and this is what we find in the skeletons from the pre-flood world. This is why they had the long skulls. They lived for a long period of time under these conditions. Those in the underworld, not exposed to the volcanism, would not have grown. The Anuna were 100% humans, but they were humans who had lived for about 200 or 300 years far from the surface. They came from underworld facilities. Even in the old Sumerian text, it says Enki came from the deep. He was Lord of the deep. The deep was underground. This was the ancient Greek Tartaros. Somewhere in the far west, but deep underground, was the origin of the Anuna. By the time the Babylonian Edamu cult priests were telling the story, centuries after the cataclysm, now all of a sudden the Anuna were Anunnaki, and they were gods that descended to the earth, but that's not what the older Sumerian texts say. Listen, I have often promoted the idea on my channel here and in my published books that we already have the coding within our DNA to adapt very rapidly to any biosphere that we get exposed to. If the pressure and radiation is different the deeper we go, then it doesn't take but one generation to adapt to it. We may be very uncomfortable going 19 miles underneath the surface of the earth. It may be a very different environment. It may be a very different type of air pressure. I don't know. Exposure to different types of radiations, it might be very, very different. It would activate different latent genes, and some of our junk DNA would then not be junk. It would be activated, and we would develop more characteristics and ways to adapt to that environment. But it would be our children that would be fully developed to live in that environment. It would never be us. It'll never be us. That's why whatever the population of the world is when a vapor canopy appears, you can expect that population to go through minor changes. But the great changes are going to be in their offspring, because it's at the moment of conception when all that DNA sequencing is done to get that individual's avatar to be acclimated to the new environment. Oh, I think the largest titans on record were like Og of Bashan, 13 feet tall. Uh, his descendant 400 years later was Goliath and his four sons, and Goliath was 9 foot 6 inches. Um, I'm not just talking about the traditions. Even Porter, archaeologist Porter, in the 1880s published a book. I think I have the thumbnail here. It's in it, but the giant cities of Bashan. No one could have lived in those cities unless they were 9 foot tall. All the steps are for people who stand about 9 foot tall. It boggles the mind how they can make that leap and people don't catch them. People don't call bullshit on that, on the Ancient Aliens franchise. Like, damn, you're talking about the Anunnaki and the Anuna, and then you show us pictures of these green aliens and all that. Well, where's the connection? I don't understand the connection. Because every single relief, every bust, every picture, photo, and description of the Anuna in all Sumerian text and even Babylonian text were just humans that were extra tall with beards. There's no difference. Even the busts, full bust showing them with lapis lazuli eyes, blue eyes, and white skin. They were porcelain with lapis lazuli eyes. That's white skin and blue eyes, long beards. This was the Anuna. I don't know how they get this other weird stuff, the alien grays. Yeah, this is pure adult fantasy. Now, I'm not saying the alien grays don't exist, but to me, they're not aliens. They were perfectly described in the 14th, 13th, 14th, and 15th century as fairies, as elves, as troglodytes, uh, as bogies, as hobgoblins. Yeah, all throughout Europe and different areas of Europe, they've always been described, and it's always known that they go hide in invisible doors and hills. They steal your children, and sometimes bring back a child that looks like your child, but there's differences the mother always detects. And then uh they live in the underworld. In all the traditions, they live in the underworld. Only in our modern times, technologically advanced frames of reference has the culture turned away from all the explanations of an underworld civilization of non-humans and humans to space aliens. Yeah. It's crazy, guys. It's absolutely crazy. It's crazy what we have been led to believe based off zero evidence whatsoever. We're talking about the Anunnaki and the Anuna. The Anuna are the older Sumerian version. The Anunnaki is the version that Babylon promoted. And Babylon is the one that from which we get most of our Old Testament stories. Babylon is where we get a lot of our Jewish stories. Most people don't know there's a huge crossover because the actual Jewish culture doesn't come from the Israelites of ancient times. The Jewish culture comes straight out of Babylon, a bunch of priests that used to be called the Edamu. That cult of priests were run out of there, out of Babylon, and they had to go find somewhere else to live, and they took up residence in a land outside of Moab. The land became known as Edom. The origin of the Jews are Edomites. And this is shown in the Hasmonean dynasty during the days of Jesus, when we find out that King Herod was an Edomite and the Jews were in power. Guys, it goes full circle to Babylon, just like the oldest Talmud is the Babylonian Talmud. I think it's called the Targums, but the Babylonian Talmud, the Jonathan Targum comes later. But yeah, it's when we're talking about ancient Babylon, you may as well also say Jewish. This is what we're talking about. So these are the ones that they literally falsified history, demonized the Anuna, turned them into something they weren't, and then invented scenarios that made sense to them to to explain the existence of giants, to explain the existence of technology, to explain the existence of the Great Pyramid. They invented these stories that made sense to them, and they turned things into gods. They turned the Great Pyramid construction project that was unfinished, the chief cornerstone never being laid, the construction was undone, and the construction was seemingly interrupted, and they invented this Tower of Babel scenario where the people had to stop working on the project, couldn't understand each other, and whatever. They invented the scenario of gods having sex with human females to create a race of giants, where we don't have that story from the ancient world. What we have is a totally different environment created humans to grow to huge sizes in a very short period of time.